But to introduce our guest, I would like to thank Julie for doing this today. Dr. Julie Zimmermann is an archaeologist. Her specialty is zooarchaeology, the archaeology of animal remains. And she says animal remains obviously give us information about the environment in human night and prehistory. And then I say we can dig deeper by listening to Julie and asking her questions. And if you, have questions after the broadcast of this, leave them on Facebook. I can see if she'll answer us on, or we'll get in hold of Julie and answer those in the comments. Dr. Julie Zimmermann went to Washington University in St. Louis on scholarship, where she earned her BA in anthropology. Her MA and PhD were earned at the New York University, where she studied European archaeology for a year before switching to Midwestern archaeology. She's been teaching at SIUE since 2001. And then I may have been in that first or second semester class.
You were.
I had Dr. Julie, so I can assure you, Dr. Julie is very nice. If you're apprehensive at all about asking questions, just ask him. You'll get answers. And she has been directing the archaeology field school at the Gehring Site at SIUE since 2009. So that's enough of me talking. Thank you, Dr. Julie, for joining us today, and I'll turn the reins over to you.
Thank you, Jacob. And I just let my dog back in the room. That's why I was jumping up. So hopefully he is now situated, and I will have no further interruptions. Give me a second. There we go. All right. So yes, my specialty is zooarchaeology, the archaeology of animal bones, but at the Gehring Site, where we've been digging since 2009, bone preservation is terrible. Very acidic soil. So I will not be talking about bones today. I'm going to be talking about much cooler stuff actually than bones. So yeah, I look forward to your questions. Please just send them to me through Jacob, because I can't see them right this second. Okay. So here's a map of, or an aerial photo of the Gehring Site. And for all you little kids who played soccer at the Y, and all you parents who took your kids to soccer at the Y, here's where the Y soccer fields are, right down here. So this is Stadium Road, formerly known as Bluff Road, on the SIUE campus. This is Cordy Stadium, and the YMCA soccer fields are here. And then you are probably familiar with that tree line if you have used to park over here. This is the community soccer field. I think it's currently Metro East Soccer plays there. And in the summertime, you will periodically in early summer see our tents back here in this farm field. And this is our site here. It's 11 MS99, this big red blob. It's about 35 acres in total. Currently, we have this part of it here, about 20 acres is being protected for the archaeology that is on the property there. This is the SIUE campus, like Jacob said. And the site was found back in the 1960s by archaeologists doing a good old-fashioned surface survey, just walking through plowed farm field and seeing where the artifacts were and what kind of artifacts were there. In the early 1970s, my predecessor, Dr. Sid Denny, and I think that's Sid there, he had a field school. They excavated on the site for several years back in the early 1970s. And here's a photograph from his excavation. And like Jacob said, I've been digging there on and off since 2009. And Dr. Greg Vogel dug there from 2010, 11, 12, I think. But I'm going to be talking about my excavations 2009 and 2013, 14, 16, and 18. Okay, so this is what big picture, this is what we know about the Gehring Site so far, based upon excavations and our surface collections. We know that there's just about every time period of that an archaeologist might find in this area is represented at the Gehring Site, going back to 10,000 years ago. So most of that is Native American occupation until the 1800s. So this is the oldest. Here, let me move this. This is the oldest artifact found on the site. Here is the base of a stone spear point that dates back to about 10,000 years ago. And this is a representative here. This is a piece of broken pottery. That's the maker's mark with a little unicorn on it. This is from like mid to late 1800s, something like that. So these two artifacts kind of bracket the time periods that are represented on the site from oldest here to the youngest here. But the time periods of greatest intensity on the site where people are living there for the longest, maybe even year round, different periods, would be the Middle Woodland occupation from something like 100 BC to AD 350, and the Mississippian period occupation somewhere between AD 1050 and 1400. So we also call Middle Woodland Havana or Hopewell, so you'll hear me use those terms. And I hope that all of our viewers have been to Cahokia, because it's the largest archaeological site north of Mexico, the largest city in the world, arguably at its peak around AD 1200. And so Mississippian time period is when Cahokia is the big city. So these are the two primary occupations at the site. And I'm going to tell you, all archaeologists around here want to do Mississippian, and you can't help it. It's here, it's everywhere. But the time period that really interested me is Middle period, because we know a lot less about it in this area. So I'm going to be talking about both of these occupations today. But I'm going to start with the Middle Woodland period. So roughly 2,000 years ago. What's so interesting about Middle Woodland? That term Hopewell comes from the Hopewell site in Ohio. And you see here on this map, it says Ohio Hopewell. There's also, so Hopewell refers to, we call it Hopewell Interaction Sphere. It's a big exchange network that existed around 2,000 years ago. And you see the different societies in different colors on this map that engaged in this trade network, and they're exchanging raw materials and some finished goods, but also ideas. Ideas like it's a good thing to build burial mounds. Okay, so this kind of the center some people would see is Ohio Hopewell, but another really important center of like the two big hotspots are Ohio and also what's called Havana Hopewell to the north of us, centered in the Illinois River. Oopsies, let me go back. Sorry. Centered in the Illinois River Valley along here. This map here shows you some of the exotic materials that are being exchanged within this network. And I'm just going to point out copper from the Great Lakes, which they can make into cutouts, and they can soft hammer it into different shapes. Mica is a kind of a shiny mineral that occurs in sheets that's coming from the Carolinas. All the Minecrafters, if kids ages out there or viewers watch who play Minecraft will be familiar with obsidian. It's volcanic glass, and most of the obsidian is going from is coming from like the Yellowstone area to Ohio, but if a little bit of it lands in Illinois along the way, but the vast majority of it is going into Ohio. Those Ohio Hopewellian people are like obsidian hoarders. Okay, so they're also, Hopewell people are also into other shiny minerals besides the mica, like galena and quartz. So they like shiny stuff, okay? Silver also coming from the Great Lakes. So why do I like Hopewell so much? Why was I so interested in Hopewell? Again, we don't know as much about it here in the American Bottom, which is the area we're in, the Mississippi River floodplain that goes from Alton down to Chester. We don't know as much about it here, but also what's really interesting about Hopewell is these ideas they're exchanging are represented in their artwork. They make this beautiful artwork that shows that they've got some pretty interesting ideas they're communicating. So let me show you here a couple examples of a few of my favorite artifacts from Middle Woodland period. These are from the Illinois Valley north of us. These are not from the Gehring site. Okay, I wish. All right. So here we have on the right here, two little ceramic bowls. And when I say little, they'd probably fit in your hand, something like this. You can see these are centimeters marked on these scales here. But they're about the size of a typical cereal bowl. Can you see this funny shape outlined on it? This is, well, I'll tell you what it is in a second, but you see it on this image here too. So this is a mussel shell. And I was working in the Illinois State Museum on my dissertation 20 years ago when they found this and came in with it to the museum that day. This is a mussel shell from which the outer layer has all been scraped off to reveal the nacre, the mother of pearl underneath. So it's beautiful, shiny, like a pearl, and then somebody has carved in the same image. What is this thing? It's a kind of a bird. It's a roseate spoonbill. The roseate spoonbill, which is this creature here, if you don't know what I'm talking about, the roseate spoonbill is a bird that is only found like down, they're not here, they don't live here, they're down in the Everglades, that area roughly. I saw roseate spoonbills for the first time in the wild last year when I went to the Everglades for the first time. And it's there. I'm going to tell you, one roseate spoonbill skeleton has been found in a burial mound in the Illinois River Valley. Now, did that roseate spoonbill fly from Florida all the way here? It's possible. Birds get caught on winds and they get way off course, but probably pretty unlikely. Probably that bird, whether it was alive or dead at the time, was traded up here. These bowls are locally made. We know that from the clays that they're made out of. They were made here in Illinois, in the Illinois River Valley. But this shell here, can you see this little tiny projection here? This little tiny projection tells you what species of mussel that is. It is Elliptiospinosa, the Atlamaha spiny mussel, which only occurs in this one river, the Atlamaha River of Southeast Georgia, which is where roseate spoonbills are from. So these bowls are locally made by people who've never seen a roseate spoonbill. That roseate spoonbill made its way up here, and people who live here may have never seen a roseate spoonbill, but they wanted that roseate spoonbill, whether alive or dead. But this artifact here, we know came from Georgia, okay? Because mussels don't swim, they just sit there their whole lives, all right? So somebody who lived there carved this in there. What's the big deal about the roseate spoonbill? Why is it so important? Why is it appearing on artifacts from this time period? Well, let me answer that question with looking at this. This is one of my other favorite artifacts from Illinois. This is also from the Illinois River Valley. As you can see, we all recognize beaver, and this is made out of a black stone. And it's just a few inches long. It's about this long. You would smoke this. You would put a tube in here, and you pack this with tobacco. They have tobacco. They're growing in their gardens. 2,000 years ago, has come from South America. Besides the fact that this is such a beautifully realistic rendition of this cute little beaver, his eyes are made out of freshwater pearls. His tooth is made out of, guess what? A beaver's tooth. They took a beaver tooth and they carved it and stuck it in there to be his teeth. And so they're smoking it with the tube coming out here. They're looking at this little guy. He's looking in the face while they're smoking this pipe. So what do beavers and roseate spoonbills have in common? They're both diving animals. They dive down into the water. They're earth divers in a Native American mythology. So it's a very common Native American creation story from tribes of the eastern, what's now the eastern United States. I think both Iroquois and Algonquin groups, stories about the earth begins, it's a water world, and to bring earth to this world and make it into the earth that we know, these earth divers swim down one by one into the water to try to retrieve the earth and bring it back up. And in the stories, it's always one animal tries and fails, second animal tries, fails, third animal tries, fails, fourth animal tries and finally succeeds. And that's how the earth begins, but with this little bit of earth brought back up. And it's usually muskrat is the successful fourth animal. But I have no doubt that when we're looking at these artifacts, these are earth divers. And so when you look at this little cool little pipe, or these artifacts showing that roseate spoonbill, these are telling creation stories. It would be like looking at a picture of Adam and Eve and we all know what that means, okay? So they're telling stories, and that's what these artifacts represent, all right? So let me point out that all of those artifacts that we just looked at came out of burial mounds, mounds like this in the Illinois River Valley. And so if we look at this map here again, we call this Havana culture, named for the Havana, town of Havana has burial mounds there also in the central Illinois River Valley up near Dixon Mounds Museum if you've been there. And you can see all up and down the Illinois River Valley and the Mississippi River Valley too within this area, there are lots of burial mounds. So within these burial mounds, they're burying people, but they're also bearing with them lots of these beautiful works of art and exotic materials coming from all over this trade network area, this Hopewell interaction sphere. Down to the south of us, This is called Crab Orchard down to the south of us, a different Hopewell culture, but they're also building burial mounds up along the Kaskaskia River and the Mississippi River to the south of us in the Wabash. But here, where we are in the American bottom, see this red dot here, this red dot here, that is the Gehring Site. And you notice, sorry, these maps aren't one map, but there are no burial mounds in this area. So where is the American bottom, this floodplain where we're at of the central Mississippi River Valley? This is the center of the world for Mississippian people, for Cahokians 1,000 years later. In the Middle Woodland Hopewell period, 2,000 years ago, this is kind of a backwater. This is, we're not Havana, we're more like Havana people to the north of us than we are to the Crab Orchard people to the south. But we're kind of, I mean, we're kind of like an in-between area where these cultures come together, all right? And we do find some Hopewell materials here, but no burial mounds. There are burial mounds across the river in St. Louis, but not here in the American bottom. So then moving to the Gehring Site, what can we learn about Middle Woodland Hopewell from the Gehring Site? Again, this is our site, and I want to emphasize to you, see this little tiny yellow speck here? That's the excavation area that I'm talking about. Okay, so this is 35 acres total, this site. And the area that we have excavated, I forget, it's like less, I don't remember that off the top of my head, it's like less than 2,000 square feet. So we have excavated a tiny little part of the site. And so first, what you're looking at in the map here on the right is showing you the plan of the area where we have excavated. So every year we dig a little area, and so we draw a new map, and so we put these squares together and we can see the site as it's unfolding before us, one little square at a time. So the blue we're going to talk about later is Mississippian period. The red is the Middle Woodland Hopewell stuff that I was most interested in. So these, I'm first going to talk about these three bigger red circles here and what came out of them. All right. And what are those? Those are, we call them features. They're storage pits. It's where Native Americans 2,000 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, if we're talking about Mississippian, they're digging holes in the ground to store stuff. Okay, so 2,000 years ago, they're storing things like sunflower seeds. They're growing sunflowers in their gardens. They're growing squashes in their garden. If you like zucchini and yellow squash, like I had for lunch today, thank the people who lived here 4,000 years ago, domesticated the ancestors of yellow squash and zucchini right here 4,000 years ago. So they're growing those plants. They love hazelnuts during the Middle Woodland period. So they're storing plant foods in these pits. And when these pits are no longer good for storing plant foods, maybe they get bugs in them or something like that, or the site's abandoned, maybe people come back later. Eventually they start throwing trash in those pits. And so when we find them, they're full of, we are finding plant remains in these pits. I told you not too many animal bones, but they're also full of broken up artifacts, such as what you're seeing here. These are big pieces of pottery sticking out. And so how deep, speaking of dig deeper, how deep do we have to dig? Not deep at all. This site has lost about 5 feet of topsoil since the 1970s because of horseradish agriculture, which is very destructive. And so we're finding these 2,000-year-old features. This is ground surface today, is right here where our cursor is pointing. And so this is just like a foot or so below ground surface. We remove what's been plowed and we'll see a big dark circle, and we know this is a storage pit. And so those digging into those, that's where we're finding most of the artifacts. So again, here we can see pottery sticking out of this feature. And here's the pottery that was they came out of that feature. So these are the kind of pottery that archaeologists usually find. These are some nice big pieces here. So this is about a foot from top to bottom. Here's my scale down here. Again, these are centimeters in my scale. This piece here is a piece of like this jar here. This is called Havana ware. This is the everyday pottery that they use. This stuff over here is the fancy stuff. This is Hopewell ware. This is from a bowl, but you can see the design on it would be like from this Hopewell jar here. So the Havana ware everyday stuff, they'll put little bumps at the top and they've got cord impressions on it, but it's otherwise it's undecorated. but this, the fancy Hopewell stuff, their rituals, you know, sacred ware, they're etching designs into it again, like the roseate spoonbill, like we saw earlier, or in this case, this is some abstract geometric form. Maybe it does represent some kind of animal or cosmological motif that I can't guess today, 2,000 years later. But I want to point out to you, do you see that red in there? That beautiful red paint is preserved 2,000 years later. It's spectacular. And it is incredibly rare. I want to emphasize, it is very rare to find this beautiful red painted Hopewell pottery here in the American Bottom. Up north in the Illinois Valley, they find this pottery mostly in burial mounds, but to find it down here in the American Bottom, in this kind of no man's land in between area, that's pretty unusual. Here's a close-up of that pottery here. You can see the red paint just a little bit better. And here's some of the other artifacts that came out of that pit. Some spear points from that time period, stone spear points. And these are also stone tools here. These, we call these lamellar blades. They're long, skinny flakes. And we're not sure exactly what they were using them for, but they are specific to this time period. Okay, so those are some of the artifacts that came out of that feature we found back in the summer of 2009. Here in the summer of 2013, we found another, this is another one of those circular storage pits. Here you can see the dark soil against the lighter background. Again, it's dark because they're throwing trash in there, so it's full of rich organics. And out of this pit, and this is not far from that earlier pit, the earlier pit we were looking at is probably about right over here where the screen would be, except now it's buried 4 years later. Anyway, so here in this pit, look at her big happy grin. What is that thing in her hand? It's a little figurine. Here's a close-up of that figurine. Front, side, back. Look at the little toes pointing up. Looks like a little baby in the sleeper pajamas with little feet. This guy, so I wrote up an article on the Middle Woodland occupation at the site. If anyone wants to look at it, I'm sure Jake could help you get a copy of it, or I'd be happy to send you a copy. Came out in Illinois Archaeology 2018. And look, our little figurine made the front cover. So it's like a cover girl or boy or something. So this is a really unique figurine. Let me show you why. Over here on the left, this kind of figurine, these are the fancy Hopewell figurines that you find in burial mounds up north of us in the Illinois Valley and down south of us in the Crab Orchard area. They'll find these elaborate, intricate, very finely detailed little figurines. They're about the size, typically they'll fit in the palm of your hand. And you can see they're painted, and they show the hairstyles, they show the jewelry people are wearing. You can see this is a woman. Women wear skirts. They're typically topless. The figurines show mothers nursing baby, mother carrying baby on the back. The men wear more like loincloths. So you find these fancy, detailed, beautiful figurines in burial mounds. Okay, not here in the American Bottom, very rare. But what you find more commonly here in the American Bottom is called the Casper the Ghost style figurine. So if you're my age, you grew up watching Casper the Ghost in reruns from some earlier time period of cartoon making. Younger people will have seen other versions of Casper the Ghost, but you get the idea. Casper the Ghost has a blob for a head, blobs for arms, and typically a blob for a torso. This one is broken. Well, so then look at our guy over here. Our figurine is Casper the Ghost from the waist up. From the waist down, though, it's one of these fancy figurines. When you hold this, you can see somebody spent a lot of time working on the back of this figurine's legs. When you hold this up to the light, you can see light coming through. It's, can I say butt crack, Jacob?
Yeah.
You can see light coming between the legs here. And it's like somebody was making this little figurine, and they got up to the waist, and they were trying to make one of these fancy ones, and they're like, oh, I'm never gonna get this. And they just finished, they gave up and finished off like Casper the Ghost. So this is a very unusual hybrid figurine of a mix of these two different styles of figurine, the Casper the Ghost blob style and the very fancy style of figurine. So interesting little find. And here's some of the other pottery that came out of that same feature. This is also Hopewell pottery, but you don't see the red paint. Why? Because this is a style that is from about 50 years later in time. So it's still Middle Woodland period, but not as old as the first pit that we found. And I would love to tell you that we found this cool, beautiful mica cutout of this falcon foot. But actually what we found was about a teaspoon of mica flakes. So I told you mica is this mineral that comes from the Carolinas, Appalachian area. And it's a shiny, it's shiny and occurs in sheets. And they make these cutouts like that falcon foot that you see there. But it's very, very fragile, highly erodible. It does not, if you hit that with water, it decays rapidly. So you're not going to find something like this unless you're digging in a burial context with very good preservation. So our site, I told you, does not have good preservation. So to find even a teaspoon of flakes of mica tells you that we had something like this. Again, the figurine came out of the same pit, Hopewell pottery coming out of the same pit. There were also lamellar blades in this pit, but whatever it was decayed. So everybody brace yourself. This is the only animation I'm going to put in my PowerPoint. Ready? Here we go. Did you see that? That was to represent how, yeah, it just disappears. Water hits it, it's gone. Okay. So then that same year, we found very close to the pit that we were just looking at with the figurine and the mica. We found this pit, which also has middle woodland pottery in it, but looks again different. Does it look not as good? That's because it's later in time as that middle woodland Hopewell interaction sphere is breaking down, and the pottery style is getting a little bit sloppier. So it's middle woodland style, but it's not Hopewell's. It's not the fancy Hopewell stuff anymore. And here's some broken spear points from that same pit. So then we have, with those three pits and the pottery coming out of them, they're all middle woodland period, but we go from this early Havana stuff with fancy Hopewell, red painted Hopewell pottery with it, to less fancy Hopewell, to the latest Havana pottery. Looks a little bit sloppier and no more Hopewell stuff. Probably 50 years later, the radiocarbon dates came back showing that, yeah, they're all about, these three pits are about 50 years apart each. And so we're looking at some, cultural change through time on the site. So let me tell you, the model for the occupation, middle woodland occupation in the American bottom suggests that, remember, this is the Illinois River Valley here on my map. And this is where all those burial mounds are with all the fancy stuff in them. And the theory is that about 2,000 years ago, middle woodland people start moving out of the lower Illinois Valley and settling here in the American bottom. Okay. This area you see hatched here. And so they're immigrants to this area. There isn't really anybody here else at that time for them to encounter. They start settling in this area and living in this area. Where are they building their burial mounds? Because that's part of their culture. Now, I don't know, not here. They might be going across the river again to St. Louis, or they might be going back up home to the lower Illinois River Valley, but they're not doing it here. So because we don't have burial mounds, again, it's very rare to find the kind of fancy Hopewell stuff that we're finding at the Gehring site. And besides the red slip pottery and the mica that I showed you, here's some other examples from surface collections of artifacts that are coming from the Gehring site from this time period. Copper, I told you, comes from the Great Lakes. This is a middle woodland awl, middle woodland style awl made out of copper coming from the Great Lakes. Selena, remember, is a shiny mineral that they like. This is a pretty big size cube of it. That might be coming from, 50 or 100 miles away, not as far as the Great Lakes, but it's still not local. Here's another piece of mica. I want to emphasize this here again, you Minecrafters will recognize maybe that this is obsidian. I think we have found a total of 3 pieces of obsidian from our site. And yes, these are just little flakes about the size of your thumbnail. But for the state of Illinois, remember again, it's the people in Ohio are like hoarding the obsidian. They've got tons of obsidian spear points out in Ohio. But here in Illinois, we really have about a pound of total obsidian that's been found, mostly flakes. And so for us to find 3 flakes in our site, that's a lot. This is another one of those little lamellar blades that's been shaped into a lizard shape. This is seen as called a lizard effigy. This is a great big, we might call this a disc, or it's also called a north point, made out of a fancy grade of stone called Cobden Dongola chert that comes from Southern Illinois. So Middle Woodland people love this Cobden Dongola chert from Southern Illinois. Very lustrous, high quality chert to make their spearheads out of. Quartz, this is probably dates the Middle Woodland period. Again, they love these shiny crystals. And this is a drilled bear tooth. The first map I showed you made it look like grizzly bear teeth are being imported to the Midwest from the West. And we know that's actually not true. We can't actually tell grizzly bear teeth from black bear teeth. So this is probably the canine tooth of a black bear, but and you can see it's been drilled with holes to like wear as a necklace. But let me tell you, this is the only bear tooth or remain of any kind that's been found in the American bottom. I think maybe from all time periods, but from Middle Woodland in particular. So it's quite common to find necklaces made out of canine teeth, including bear canines, in burial mounds in the Illinois Valley, but you don't find that here. So again, this is something really special. So there's something really interesting happening at the Gehring site during the Middle Woodland period. It's an important place. And so going back to our map here, I would talked about artifacts coming out of these 3 pits. And so this is a pretty small area. This probably all 3 of these pits I'm actually, it looks like I'm in Machu Picchu, but I'm actually in my bedroom right now. That's me doing the headstand, by the way. Yeah. I'm going to say probably all 3 of these pits would fit in my bedroom. So they're pretty close together, but remember, they're not all in use at the same time. This one's the earliest here. This one's about 50 years later, and this one's about 50 years later. I also want to point out these little red dots here. Now, I don't know that these are Middle Woodland period. I'm hoping they are. I'm guessing. Those are those features there, this red dot here. Those are they look like pits, but they're much smaller. They're about this big. They're from posts. You can't tell exactly how old those posts are because they don't have artifacts in them, and I don't have anything to radiocarbon date them with. But that's the kind of way Middle Woodland people build their houses, is to stick these posts in the ground, and it would typically be a big circular structure, you know, something about this, you know, oops, I didn't mean to go back. Something big enough to fit all 3 of these pits inside of it. And let me tell you why I'm so excited about the possibility of finding a Middle Woodland house structure is because you see these blue rectangular structures here. Those are Mississippian structures. Okay, that's cool to find a Mississippian house, but there are literally thousands of Mississippian period houses have been found in the American bottom because we are in the shadow of Cahokia, largest archaeological site north of Mexico. The big city of the Mississippian period is right here. And so we have literally, archaeologists have literally found thousands of these Mississippian period houses. But how many Middle Woodland houses have been found in the American bottom? About 12. And that's about twice as many as have been found in the Illinois Valley. So in the Illinois Valley, they've, you know, for 100 years, archaeologists used to dig these burial mounds. We don't dig burial mounds anymore. But in all the excavations during that time, we've only found about 6 houses for this time period in the Illinois Valley. So to find I would love to find the next Middle Woodland house in the American bottom here on our site. If I live long enough, finding a post at a time every other year. Okay. So, Jacob, are there any questions about Middle Woodland before I launch into Mississippian?
I don't have any yet. So
okay.
I guess it's launch, and we can always. I'm still monitoring the live stream. So.
Okay, then I'm gonna.
At the end if that's what we have to do.
All right, and if they come later, I'm happy to answer questions. That's my job. Okay, so then I'm going to launch into Mississippian then. So the Middle Woodland, 2,000 years old, is in red. Mississippian is in blue. So you can see more storage pits, but these 2 house structures. So let's start with the house structure. Let me say how big these things are. I'm going to give it to you in metric. It's like they're about 5 by 7 meters. And maybe Jacob can do the math and figure out what that is square footage in house and sorry, what that would be square footage size. But here, I'll just show you a picture of excavating and you'll get an idea about how big they are. This is what they look like when we find them. Again, here's the ground surface. You can see the grass. We dig down to where the base of what's been plowed, and lo and behold, these long dark stains you see here is the trench from where they had the walls for their houses. So that's their wall trench. Now for Mississippi here, and here you can see it in profile. This is the wall trench here. So whereas those middle woodland people are sticking one big post at a time in the ground, the Mississippian people are actually, so middle woodland people are living in big circular houses. Mississippian people are living in smaller houses. They're rectangular, and they don't stick one post in the ground at a time. They dig a big long trench, and then they slap the whole wall up in there at once. And the posts are much smaller Mississippian period. So they probably live in extended families, middle woodland period. Mississippian period is probably a nuclear family. You know, it's probably parents and, you know, 3 or 4 kids or something like that living in one of the structures. Now these structures, when they dig them, they actually dig a big hole in the ground, like a basement, but we call them semi-subterranean structures because you would step down inside of them. It's only one story, but the floor that you're standing on is below ground, and they could be 3 feet deep. You can see reconstructions of them when you go to Cahokia Mounds at the museum there, which I'm sad to tell you is not open yet, but hopefully will be by the end of the summer. And when you go in there and you see those reconstructed houses, and when you see those paintings on the ground, those are showing you the footprint of where they actually found Mississippian period structures. Okay, so that is the actual size of them. So where is our basin here? We have the wall trench. There should be that little basin, or the base, like the hole in the ground should be on top of that. We shouldn't be finding these wall trenches until the bottom of the floor. So where'd the floor go? It was probably, again, plowed away. We estimate 5 feet of topsoil lost since the 1970s. So it's kind of a bummer. If we had dug the site in the 1970s, like Sid Denny did, we would have found a beautiful Mississippian surface, and at 5 feet deeper, that middle woodland surface would have been intact, unplowed. But unfortunately, now it's almost most of the Mississippian stuff is plowed away, and the middle woodland is plowed too. So sometimes it's better not to dig deeper. At least not, be careful. Anyway, all right, so this gives you an idea of when I said this is 5 by 7 meters. This gives you an idea about how big that is. Okay, so this is summer of 2014. This is about half of my field school crew that summer. And so for Mississippian period house, let me tell you, this is a big house. So I imagine, think about this, where I think about 15 miles from Cahokia Mounds, something like that. And Cahokia Creek is just over here behind us. We're right next to Cahokia Creek. So what my model is of what's going on in Mississippian period is that this is a farm family. And why is their house big? Because farmers have big families, and they're growing corn. By this point, the middle woodland people 2,000 years ago did not have corn, but by Mississippian period, corn is really important to them. And they're still growing squashes and sunflowers, but they're also growing lots of corn, and they're probably filling their canoes up and taking it on right on down to Cahokia on Cahokia Creek. Okay, so we noticed that they have storage pits inside their house for to keep their food safe. This is the other, if you remember on the map, the other blue outline structure. This is this one we found in the summers of 2016 and 18. And this excavation, I'm going to say, if you go back to this one, look how neat and tidy this looks. That's because this didn't get rained on. Sorry, this is not rained on. This is what happens when you've been working on your excavation for a couple of weeks. And this is what happens when rain hits your excavation really badly and messes it up. But we can still see, despite the mess, here's the long, if you look where my arrow is pointing, this is another one of these wall trenches. You can see a long dark line here, and there's another one here. And here it is in profile. Here's the wall trench in profile. So again, the actual floor of the house has been plowed away. We're down below the floor of the house. And again, to give you an idea how big this is pretty much my entire crew the summer of 2018 can fit inside this structure pretty well. So these are for Mississippian, for our, you know, for by modern standards, these are tiny houses. These, again, they're, my bedroom is probably not quite this big. But for Mississippian period, this is a pretty big structure, okay? And if we go back to our map here, so we looked at both of these structures. Again, also storage pits from Mississippian period. And here the students are excavating these storage pits. Again, here you can see the ground surface, this foot is on here. That's how deep what the plow zone was, and the base of what was plowed. Here are these storage pits. These storage pits should be like 5 feet deep, but this is all that is left of them because they have been plowed away and eroded by horseradish farming. All agriculture is pretty destructive to archaeology, but horseradish is the worst because it goes really deep compared to corn or soybeans, for example. Okay, so we have these 2 Mississippian period houses, and I have some, I just had a student do a master's thesis on them. I have a tentative date on them, and I'm gonna say this one was estimated to be older, and the reason, and so maybe about AD 1050, about 1,000, not quite 1,000 years old, from early Mississippian period. And we know it's older in part because of some of the ceramics that came from the wall trenches, but also because later Mississippian period came and dug pits on top of those wall trenches. Okay, so this is not as old. So this is later Mississippian people coming, and they might be the last Mississippian group to come. So the pits that you see there are inside the house, probably their pits, but we can't say that for sure because not too many artifacts came out of them. Anyway, so my model again is these are farm families, and it could be one farm family that, you know, maybe they lived in this house and farmed here for 50 years until the soil started to get depleted. I got to tell you, they're growing corn without beans. So they're depleting the nitrogen. And then so maybe they just go up the field a little bit and farm up there for another 20 years or something. And then maybe they come back and they build this house here. So remember, we've dug a very small area here at the south end of the site, and we have 2 houses, but there are probably more. And in fact, oh, and let me tell you, the artifacts coming out of the Mississippian features, because there's hardly anything left of them, are not fantastic. The pottery, for example, is really broken up, and Mississippian period put crushed up shell, mussel shell inside their pottery to clay to hold it together, and that does not preserve well. But here again, you can see the red, that beautiful red paint preserved on this pottery. This is another Mississippian period house from Dr. Vogel's excavations up farther north in the field. And so he's actually got some of that house basin intact here at the floor of the house. Great big hoe made out of stone. And this is a local chert, Burlington chert. The stone is usually coming from Southern Illinois to make these hoes. And this gives you an idea of how big it is. And the shine is for the sickle polish of the silicates in the soil polish the stone, and that's how you know that they are using these to till the ground. Okay, so this would be hafted on a stick. Here's a Mississippian period feature, again, deeper because the site's better preserved up in the northern part of the site. And so more of it left, more of this pit left intact. And little owl effigy. This is a tiny, about the size of the tip of my thumb, made out of clay, and it appears to be the head of an owl. And you can see a little hole as if it's suspended somehow, hanging on a string. Oh, also at that end of the site, remains of a burial were found and covered right back up again. And if the site, SIUE has stopped farming the site, they don't allow it to be farmed anymore. If it had been farmed, if it had been plowed one more time, this burial would have been destroyed. So I'm really happy to tell you that the university is now, we're protecting the site based upon the results of our excavations. So we did not dig this grave. We showed it was there. We covered it back up. But this dates the Mississippian period. This person was buried with copper, some kind of copper artifact. Again, copper coming from the Great Lakes, marine shell beads, marine shell coming from the Gulf Coast, and also a ceramic discoidal here. And what's a discoidal? This is a stone discoidal or chunky stone that was found at the south end of the site. Mississippian period people played games with called chunky. And we know that because the Spanish saw them still doing this in the Southeast when they came to the Southeast in the 1500s, and they would roll the stone and throw spears at it. Sounds like fun. It was the Stone Age. Okay. So let me tell you one last thing about the Mississippian period occupation. These people are farmers, but they get access to exotic materials like copper from the Great Lakes, marine shell from the Gulf Coast. They have time to play chunky. But another fancy kind of artifact that we find from this time period are these figurines made out of red stone, is coming from the St. Louis area. And they're making these apparently at some workshop in the Cahokia area and trading them out from here. And I didn't find this, but I read in an article that a collector at the site had found an elbow fragment from one of these red stone figurines decades ago. And I was so excited because I was really hoping that maybe I would find the rest of the figurine. It would be like this. This represents a great Native American hero named Red Horn. If we had more time, I would love to tell you that story. On the right here, you can see a reconstruction of this figurine if you visit Cahokia Mounds. This is also telling a story, but we don't know what story it's telling. But when I finally saw the figurine fragment, notice the shape of that elbow. This is the elbow fragment of the figurine that was found at the Gehring site. So no, I do yoga, but man, I can't bend my elbow like that. I almost get my knee to bend like that, but it's probably actually a frog. Do you see, here, let me move our faces there. Do you see the shape of this frog ankle? Look at the shape of a frog ankle. So this is another one of those Mississippian period redstone figurines. It's a pipe. Again, you'd shove tobacco in here and there'd be a tube coming out here and you'd smoke this. The frog would be looking at you. So this frog pipe is thought to represent not just any old frog. It's thought to represent, this came from a site, I think down in Tennessee. It's thought to represent a shaman frog. Why? Because this is a rattle in the frog's hand. Now, I noticed when I was looking for pictures of frog rattles to compare to the fragment that was found at the Gehring site, I found this popped up, this red figurine, and oh shoot, I think this was found in the Illinois Valley, but again, it's thought that these figurines are being made at Cahokia and then sent out from here elsewhere. This is a shaman smoking a frog pipe. Okay, so this is a frog shaman. This is a shaman smoking a frog pipe. And now look at this guy's knee and look at his back. And you see it's the same shapes that you see in this frog. Let's go back to our humans. They don't have a back that looks like that. They don't have knees that look like that. This shaman is actually transforming. He's not only smoking a frog pipe, he is transforming into a frog. And he's probably going to look like this in the end. This frog shaman probably is a human shaman transformed into a frog in Native American, in Mississippian cosmology. Okay, so why would Mississippians believe that? I mean, I don't know. It's associated with encouraging rainfall or something. Again, if I had more time, I'd love to tell you the story of Red Horn, a Native American hero, but let me just point out that Middle Woodland people are telling creation stories. That's what they're showing in their artwork. Mississippian people are telling hero stories, and what the story is of this woman, I don't know. One interpretation is she's the old woman who never dies. Long story behind that. Frog shaman, whatever. They're telling different kinds of stories. They still have creation stories, to be sure, but that's not what they're showing in their artwork. So finish with my idea about what's going on at Cahokia. I think that sites like Gehring these people consider themselves to be Cahokians, and they come help build Cahokia and support Cahokia. They feed Cahokia. They build the mounds there because they want to be part of what's going on at Cahokia. Cahokia would have been like, going to New York City if you've never left a town of 200 and all of a sudden you see this major city. It'd be like nothing you've ever seen before. So I think that's what's going on at Cahokia, and I could talk about that for days. So I'll just end with Again, going back to this map of our site to show you, again, the red shows the Middle Woodland features, 2,000 years old. Blue shows Mississippian, 1,000 years old. And again, to point out this little tiny yellow speck on the site, we have dug such a tiny portion of the site that there's a lot left out there. And we don't actually need to dig deeper. We need to dig wider in this case. And I think that is it. Yeah, I wanted to say thank you. And this is what the site looks like today because we're not plowing it anymore. We're trying to reestablish. We could not afford native prairie grasses. So we planted like fescues and non-native grasses, but we planted with native prairie flowers such as black-eyed Susans and gray-headed coneflower and partridge pea, Illinois bundleflower. That's it, Jacob.
Okay. If anyone that's watching our stream has just tuned in for the second half of it and didn't hear our beginning bit, please ask any questions that you have in the comments on our Facebook stream. I'm watching it to see if anyone has questions. None have been asked so far. I guess I can come up with some. Just the scheduling of your digs. Are you only out there digging when you have a class that's scheduled as a course?
Correct. So that's a great question, Jacob. Thank you. Yes, it's a major undertaking just to put those tents up. So when you drive by, you see those tents, let me tell you, it was a lot of work just putting those tents up, and they stay up all summer. So when we're out there digging, my field schools have always been 8 weeks. We've recently cut them back to 6 weeks. But it is 6 long weeks. And yes, they are for, it's a students doing this for credit. It's an anthropology class. And, for anthropology majors, they are required, if they're doing the Bachelor of Science, and if they're doing the Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology, they take a foreign language, 2 semesters of a foreign language. If they're doing the Bachelor of Science in Anthropology, they have to do one of our field schools. So this is one of their options, is to do this archaeology field school. And we try to do it every other year, depending upon circumstances. And so I last dug in the summer of 2018. And the plan was to have our new archaeologist, Dr. Susan Koyman, dig the summer with our students, but we had to cancel due to coronavirus. So she will be out there next summer with our students, and probably to get us back on schedule in the summer, she'll be out there again, probably in the summer of 2022. Yeah, and I wanted to say on this subject of, you know, we are happy to have people come out and see the excavation. I started inviting people out in the summer of 2013, and I'll send an email out through the SIUE listserv. I went to this farmer's market in the summer of 2018 to invite the general public. I'll let you know when it's happening, Jacob. And we love to have people come out and tour the site and see the excavation as it's ongoing. The month of June is the time to do that. We get started in the middle of May. We'll be done by the end of June. So the middle part of June is the best time to come see what we're doing. And we've hosted about 500 people, 500 visitors I think, so far. And we welcome visitors of all ages. If you got little kids, bring little kids. Grandparents, bring your grandparents. Make sure you bring your own water.
That's good advice. This might put you a little on the spot. You can give me an answer later if you want to think about it. But so this is the Edwardsville Public Library. Anyone that's watched this video this far might be interested in further reading. Are there any like go-to books that you recommend someone pick up? Hopefully we have it. If not, I can buy whatever it is you might recommend to a layman like me.
Yes. Let me tell you, first of all, I personally, I have not written any books. I'm lucky if I can read a book these days. But if you go to the SIUE Anthropology website, you'll see I have links to some of the articles that I have written about the Gehring Site or about Mississippi, about Cahokia. So you can click on those and download the PDFs. But for books, my favorite book is oh shoot, I think it's called Cahokia, City of the Sun, maybe. And the first author is a woman's name is 3 names. It ends with Young. And the second author is Melvin Fowler, Fowler, Melvin Fowler. And so with he was the archaeologist. She was like a popular science writer or something like that, who helped. I'm going to tell you, most archaeologists write books that you will never want to read. They can take the most interesting subject and make you wish you had never picked up that book. So luckily for us, the late Dr. Fowler teamed up with someone who could write, and she wrote a really interesting book. I think it's about 20 years old now. And but it goes into the history of archaeology at Cahokia, which in and of itself is fascinating, telling you about, you know, what it was like there 100 years ago when they were trying to turn Cahokia Mounds into a state park, for example. And it talks about what we know about Cahokia. And at this point, it's 20 years out of date, but it's still really excellent. You will also see a relatively recent book by William Iseminger, Iseminger, I think. That's how you spell that. And actually, it was in a previous slide. Let's go. Yeah, right there. That's his name. Bill Iseminger, just retired from Cahokia, worked there for about 50 years, and also apparently a fabulous painter, because look at this beautiful reconstruction he painted of the site. And so he wrote a book a couple of years ago that's pretty comprehensive and I'm sure very readable. Tim Pauketat, Pauketat, has written several books, and one is put out by Penguin. And I'm going to say that is the one that is meant more for the general public. Some of his other books are, again, books for other archaeologists, not anyone else would want to read it. So those would be my suggestions.
Great. Yeah, I'll have to look. It looks like, I don't think that we Edwardsville has the Melvin Fowler book or even some of these others. So I'll make sure we get these. You can also start ordering things through Interlibrary Loan now that we've got deliveries set back up with the Illinois Heartland Library System. So we can definitely get it for you, any of the books that Julie mentioned.
And I'll be happy if you want Jacob to send you the exact titles and dates and everything. Just make it easy for you.
I can just put those in the comments of this post.
Yep.
If you want to email those over to me. I don't see any other questions. Thank you, Dr. Julie Zimmermann, for giving your time to us and participating in our on-theme discussion for Dig Deeper. Summer reading is not just for kids, but it's also for adults. We can all join in the fun. So our summer reading program ends at the end of July. You can go on to Beanstack, download the app, and retroactively put things that you've read since June, and you can get prizes. I know for the adults that I manage, there's a $100 gift card that you can win. So get incentives and prizes for reading books. So read a book, check out the books that Julie mentioned, check out, or take Julie up on the offer for, it would be, you said May, June 2022, when they have the site back open?
We'll be back out next summer. So email me. I am JULZIMM@SIUE.edu. And I'll set up a tour for you. So don't just show up, because we have to have you sign paperwork and stuff. And I try to get people to come in groups. And so I will not be excavating. I'm department chair. I can't do two jobs for the price of one. I just don't have it in me anymore. And so Dr. Koyman will be directing the excavation, but I will be happy to bring people out on tours or set it up with Dr. Koyman for the tour. And there's a ton of information, by the way. All the reports I've written on the Gehring site are also, I mentioned articles I published on the SIUE website, the anthropology department website, but every, nauseating detail about the excavation in the long field reports I write are also posted on our website.
Okay, we'll check that out. Thank you again, Julie. Thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.
All right, well, take care. Have a good one.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks.